Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gerontological Society of America's Career Conversation, Non-Academic Careers in Gerontology, the Policy Edition. My name is Dr. Sarah Dice. I am a research associate at the Institute on Aging at Portland State University. Before we begin today's program, I'd just like to provide a few logistical considerations. Please keep your audio on mute throughout the event and submit your questions for the panelists through the Zoom chat function, which you can find in the panel at the bottom of your screen. We invite you to view the event in Zoom speaker view. This career conversation is being recorded and will be available after the event on the GSA website. I'm joined today by GSA members Dr. Patty Slatum and Dr. Rosman Giovanni. Patty, Rosman, and I are members of the GSA Career Conversations work group that plans career conversations as well as the mentoring consultancies. GSA's Career Conversations provide a forum for an exchange of ideas about issues and strategies to build a successful career in gerontology.
So there's been a rising interest in careers outside of the academic setting that intersect with gerontology. In today's career conversation, we'll be taking a deep dive into non-academic careers related to research and public policy. During this session, our diverse panelists are going to share their career trajectories and navigating applied research roles and organizations. We encourage questions from the audience, so feel free to share your questions in the chat.
So to open today's career conversation, I would like to introduce our panelists. We are delighted to have a distinguished group of gerontologists and social scientists with us to share their career journeys. First, we welcome Dr. Karon Phillips from the Trust for America's Health. Next, we welcome Dr. Christopher Marcum from the White House Office of Management and Budget. And we're pleased to have joined Dr. Sarah Ruiz from the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute.
Each of our panelists have very different backgrounds and roles related to aging policy. So we look forward to learning from each of you during this conversation. Without further ado, Rosman, take it away.
All right. So now we'll get our discussion started with some questions for our panelists. First, can you briefly describe your career path and how you arrived at your current role? And we can start with Dr. Marcum.
Sure, thanks, Rosman, and thank the panel for inviting us to speak with you all today. I think it's really important to have these conversations, particularly as the academic job market gets narrower and the opportunities outside of the academic job market get wider. So I've had a winding path career. I think this is some of you will have some familiarity with the idea that you start off in graduate school thinking you're going to become a Research 1 professor and that's what you're going to go do. But I unfortunately was graduating right at the height of the recession and didn't have that many options. So I took a postdoc at RAND and NIA postdoc, National Institute on Aging, T32 in economics and statistics, and did some work there on influenza vaccination policy, particularly for the older population with respect to social influence and social network effects on vaccination rate uptake. And that got the attention of the National Institutes of Health. And I was recruited to work in the intramural research program at NIH. That job I was in for almost 10 years, did a lot of work, basically very much like a R1 position, but I really started getting a policy itch a few years back and wanted to do something bigger and more focused on affecting all of science and not just the very narrow area that I was studying. So I had some opportunities at NIH to work on things related to scientific review, data access policy, scientific integrity, genomic program administration, and worked in that space at the NIH for a few years, and then had an opportunity to sit as a nominee or an appointee to President Biden's Fast Track Action Committee on Scientific Integrity. That work translated into a position at the White House and working with Alondra Nelson, who many of you know. And that, that's a political position, and those are temporary, term limited. And I really wanted to stay and protect the portfolio and do some work to make sure that things like LGBTQI for older American protections that we had fought for in the administration were protected. Things like public access, scientific integrity were protected, and that wouldn't just go away in another 4 or 8 years. And so I took an opportunity to apply for a position at the White House Office of Management and Budget as a career in a career position as a statistician, and I'm very grateful to be here and to be able to continue this work. So that's me. Rosamund, do you want me to pass it to someone else, or are you taking over?
You can pass the baton. Thank you.
Sure, I'll pass it to someone who I know started her career very similar to me because we were there at the same time, Sarah.
Hi, so I'm Sarah Ruiz. I'm a senior program officer at PCORI, which is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. I finished my PhD in gerontology a little over 15 years ago. I also started my career off at RAND Corporation, but with an NICHD postdoc because my initial work had to do with the role of grandparents influencing outcomes for grandchildren. After finishing my postdoc, I became very enthusiastic about doing work outside of academia that could have a connection where I saw a more direct connection on influencing people's lives. And so I went into consulting, both for-profit and nonprofit, focused on mostly evaluations for the federal government. And so my work looked at, for example, ways to improve healthcare for older adults and people with disabilities. In the past 7 years, I've moved to the funder side. For 5 years, I was in the federal government at an institute outside of NIH. It's called the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, where I was an associate director, helping to provide oversight for, it's the largest disability research portfolio in the federal government. It's about, it was about 120 million at the time. And I continue to be interested in disability research and had the opportunity a little over 1.5 years ago to move to PCORI, where we have a focus on intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so I've been, in the past years, as you've heard me describe, focus on the intersection of aging and disability. So I say my first love was aging, my first love was gerontology, but my second love was disability.
And I'll, round out the introductions. Karon Phillips, I'm a policy development manager at Trust for America's Health. We call it TIFA. I feel like, Chris, it was a interesting winding road of a lot of self-discovery, but I did not start out at RAND like Sarah and Chris. I feel like I should have just gone to RAND with you guys, but I will say I was in a little slightly unique boat. I didn't necessarily want to go into academia. I didn't really quite know where I fit, but I didn't think it was right into academia. So I applied for 2 postdocs, and I was very specific about why and what kind of postdocs I sought. And so I applied for and took a postdoc in Temple, Texas, focused on aging based interventions that are community based. And so that was probably a pivotal part of getting me kind of in the direction I wanted to go. Plus, after that postdoc, I finished and applied for and completed the Health and Aging Policy Fellowship. So that brought me to the DC area. And it was there where I figured out a little bit more about policy. I know that's a question we'll talk about later, but I figured out the policy landscape, if you will. And after that fellowship, I was like, well, now I need to figure out where I really, really want to work. So I, like Sarah, I did do a little bit of research at a for-profit organization. I actually had an interesting experience working at an affordable housing nonprofit. So I worked directly in the community with older adults for 3 years.
After that experience, I actually, like the both of you, I did not know we had this in common. I was at the NIH, I was on a different side. I actually worked as a contractor scientific review officer, which was a very interesting experience that I greatly valued, actually. And then from there, I spent some time at US Aging, and then I landed almost 3 years ago to the day at Trust America's Health, and I love what I do every day. The short of the long is I am one of the leads on an age-friendly public health systems initiative, where the short of the long is we encourage departments of health at the state and local level to make healthy aging a priority. And believe it or not, all the skills that I picked up along the way actually get utilized every day in my role. So it's pretty exciting. So I will turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you all for sharing that. And oh my gosh, so much common ground from your beginnings. That's quite amazing. Can you each talk a little bit about some of the challenges or obstacles that you contend with being in policy-related roles?
Sure, I'll get us started. So working for a funder, part of the really exciting part is writing funding opportunities and thinking about how you can shape the field and grow the field. But I think a challenging aspect for me is, as you're thinking about those opportunities, is making sure that you're getting adequate input from the field, from the community, a broad group of different stakeholders and research partners, for example. And so I think getting to the point where you feel like you've gotten enough input that you have a well-rounded something to put out for people to respond to, I think that is an important challenge and something to think about for those that are interested in being on the funder side. It's also really interesting to get different perspectives. So, I work for an organization that does clinical comparative effectiveness research. So we're getting feedback from people with lived experience, people in healthcare, people, across a broad swath in the U.S. in terms of clinicians and academia, obviously, as well. But in hearing those different perspectives and sort of the competing demands that you would think about and shaping what funding opportunities you put out there, it's really exciting.
I think one of the more unique challenges when you're outside of an academic setting, and particularly in policy, is that if you're not working specifically for an aging institute or an aging adjacent institute, like when I'm working for the White House, and while we have a lot of interest in aging and life course, there can be an erosion, I think, of professional identity. And so as a gerontologist specifically, and so like finding ways personally for opportunities to keep the gerontological hat on is I think where my primary sort of professional challenge is. And then there are a myriad other challenges working in government. The bureaucratic aspects are of course the number one, and we feel very deeply the pressures of trying to reduce administrative burden for everybody. But at the same time, there's a sort of a challenge to make sure that we have responsibility to taxpayers. Like, we need to have documentation of things. We need to have transparency in the grant review process and the grant making process that Sarah just described. So, I think that those challenges are very different than the challenges you face on the academic side, but we certainly have equivalent challenges, I think, and some of those are related to professional identity. Over.
I'll add that working in policy, and especially working with state and local departments of health, policy is not an instant thing. So when I worked in housing, if there was a challenge, whether it be access to food or, if a resident needed a new bed, we could go out and get a partner, problem solved. You're good to go. Policy is a much longer process, and it varies so drastically from different locale to state. And so I won't call it, it's not a negative challenge. It's more of a more of a healthy challenge to navigating each landscape. So you're in one state and you understand those nuances there, and you have to be keenly aware of those. Some of those you learn as you're going along. Who are the players? What are the considerations that we all need to be aware of before we can move or help these people? Because we're not actually implementing the policy, but how are we helping people move in a certain direction? What tools do we need to help them, and helping them navigate these different landscapes? So I think it's that policy is a process, and it's not instant. There's no instant, well, can't say there's no, but there's not always instant gratification. So you have to be patient, kind of observe, very observant and strategic when you're working in different states. And again, it varies. And then even with working with different national level organizations, there's still a little bit of navigating those waters. We're a bipartisan organization, so that has its benefits, because healthy aging is not a political issue, but still making sure that you're understanding the different landscapes and the who all needs to be, I guess, at the table.
Thank you for sharing some of the challenges.
If I might bring in a couple questions from the chat relate to our first two questions before we move to the next one. And the question is, when in sharing your all's journeys, if we think about the perception of those who are in academia, tenure track positions, clinical faculty, if they were really wanting to transition into a non-academic space, what things could be done to be more prepared or competitive for these types of roles? You know, it sounds different than the academic world. And if we're in the academic world, how might we think about moving? And then whether a postdoc was kind of essential in the process for you all. Does anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I mean, first of all, we are hiring. So,
Nice.
so you can search usajobs.gov for Office of Management Budget. The Office of Chief Statistician specifically is hiring. But I would say that a couple of things that are challenging. I don't think that a postdoc is necessarily needed. In fact, I don't even really think a PhD is needed, honestly. I mean, I hate to say that for our PhD granting institutions like USC and all that are represented on the line today. But you know, you can go really far with a master's level degree in Geron and public health, et cetera, in our adjacent fields in government positions. And in fact, many of the senior folks in government don't have PhDs. They have worked really hard in their careers, and so and are brilliant. And so I don't think that postdoc or PhD is necessary. But I also say that to be prepared, there's a couple of nuances, at least in government side hiring. One is, first of all, your CV does not really mean that much. Your list of publications, your content expert stuff in most policy positions, it's good extra information, but really they want to know, really what we're looking for is demonstration of potential to work in that policy space. And so the translation of your research into policy and that sort of evidence to policy pipeline and your ability to articulate that. And so, yeah, so your teaching experience actually might come in handy for communication purposes, and your research experience definitely comes in handy, but it's really into the translation of your research that's really important, at least from a policy perspective, from our perspective. So I'd say that is like really figure out, use LinkedIn. That's another thing. That's a little bit, I'm not endorsing LinkedIn. I'm just saying that academics tend not to use it, but we use it a lot in the hiring process, and so you have to like translate your resume into like a 1 or 2 pager, your CV into a 1 or 2 pager resume. So I'll stop there.
I'll echo several things Chris said. One, I was told once, I don't know what this is. It's way too long. Where's your resume? And I said, but wait. Yeah, your CV does not translate well, and your resume should be very action oriented, like I accomplished this, I produced this, I did this. So what did you accomplish? I know I was helping someone once and they listed their positions. I said, what did you do? What skills did you obtain? Like, how can you, what did this position make you? I mean, I understand what a research scientist is, but translate that for me. So yes, that big part about translating. To answer the postdoc question, I'll say this much. For me, again, I was very strategic about my postdocs. They needed to be something that was not just going to position me to be solely focused on research. In my postdoc, learned community-based interventions that I was able to go out and execute. And one of those interventions is called CPDC, Chronic Disease Self-Management Program. I said CPDC, Chronic Disease Self-Management Program, sorry, an acronym world. And that being able to not only know what that is and to teach it was actually a very good translatable skill that area agencies on aging admired, because they actually know that they understood and respected the fact that I not only knew it, but I taught it. I also know how to do another care transition intervention. So I leveraged my postdoc, also with the support and encouragement of my postdoc mentor. I leveraged that time and used that time to get skills that were translatable. So it depends. I also did internships when I was in my PhD program, which at the time I was like, I'm not sure this is helpful, but it was, because the other challenges, I was coming straight out of undergrad. I didn't have much work experience. So I think the other thing is, how do you fill in with, I've actually done this in a work setting. So I think that's also something that people want to see on a resume, is how have you actually worked anywhere? So if an opportunity presents itself to do an internship, and there's a lot of policy internships. TIFA has one, actually, not plugging TIFA, but again, there's the American Public Health Association has one. Internships, even if, and again, I would recommend talking to your programs about that, but it will give you an opportunity to not only build connections outside of the academy, but also give you an opportunity to gain tangible, non just strictly research-based opportunities.
And I don't have much to add, but I do think people that are trying to make the transition from academia to a funder, for example, are pretty well equipped. So you tend to get a lot of unique and diverse experience in academia. And so I think those translate in the context of the organization that I work for. So we do clinical trials, but the policy research we do, it has a particular flavor. So for example, things like natural experiments. So someone who was interested in doing policy research and getting that experience. So I was able, through consulting roles, to get experience with more natural experiment type research. So I think getting those experiences along the way is helpful, but I think just the resume piece is really important, but also demonstrating really problem-solving skills, because a big part of working for a funder, I mentioned writing funding opportunities, but the other big part of it is overseeing a portfolio of projects that have challenges. So every project is going to have a challenge that is funded by a funder. And so having the diverse experiences of working through those challenges and troubleshooting, I think, is really important.
Thank you for sharing all the experience. We had a conversation, a career conversation, where we did talk about using social media to display our strengths. But I think we need to have career conversation to transform our 20-page CV into 2-page CV, like action-oriented CV. That would be a good career conversation, I believe. So my next question is, how does ageism manifest in your daily work, and what steps do you and your institution take to combat it, to overcome it? I'll start with Sarah, Dr. Ruiz.
Sure. So as I mentioned at the beginning, a big part of my work now is really more focused on disability and people with disabilities and the disability community. And so I'm going to actually speak, instead of ageism, to ableism. So for those not familiar, ableism is bias or discrimination against people with disabilities. A recent Washington Post article described ableism as the idea that the non-disabled body is the ideal, but there's a lot of definitions out there for those interested in learning more. And when you're funding disability research, I mean, there are things throughout the process that come up. So I think one of the biggest things that I want to emphasize is people's feelings about the ability of people with disabilities, and this goes for older adults as well, to actively participate in research. And I think, there's tailoring that has to happen, but making assumptions about capacity are often, stereotypical assumptions. And then I'll also add that, there are assumptions that can be made throughout the process, throughout the funding process, that can be ableist in nature. And so we all have to, and there's been an increased emphasis on thinking through those things, and in the discussions that we have when we're looking at potential research and the potential to influence the field. So I'll stop there.
I have a different kind of an interesting interface with ageism. In the policy space, particularly in science and statistics, we often think about STEM investments, and those investments and policy investments often involve training the next generation. I can't tell you how many times we hear, oh, we're going to invest in the next generation, and part of the challenge of that, and of course we want to do that, but part of the challenge of that is that there's a failure to recognize that there are established people, mid-career, late career, post-retirement, that are worthy of investment in STEM careers and statistical analysis, and so what we try to do is raise that issue to the table, bring it to the table. Well, yes, we need to invest in the next generation. We also need to invest in retooling and training the people who have had established careers, or who might want to have a mid-career change or a late career change, because there is an implicit bias in the assumption that only the next generation is going to be equipped to do the STEM and AI and work, and that's not the case. And so older people mid-career are more than capable, and in fact are often at the forefront of new development. And so that's kind of one of the areas in which, so when we're developing policies that are involved in these areas, I do try to bring to the table this idea that we need to do both aspects in our policy making.
And I'm going to take another turn. In working with public health, and I should share that is a big part of my background, is completing my MPH right before I completed my PhD. And I remember sitting in a classroom and people asking me, well, why do you want to work with older adults? I mean, you just can go get a nursing home administrator license and you don't need an MPH. And I said, I don't want to be a nursing home administrator. Aging is here. We need older adults are part of the public, so we need to worry about their health as well. And I remember that narrative. That was, that was a long time ago, and it's still slightly prevalent. People don't understand that aging is a part of just everything, and particularly with public health, one of the things that we focus on is helping people communicate about older adults properly. So even down to, we talk about the silver tsunami, we discourage that, because when we're talking about that, you're basically saying this devastating force of nature that is going to be a wave of 65-year-olds and older is going to devastate our entire healthcare and all of our systems. It's like, well, first of all, I don't want to, if I was 65, I wouldn't want to be called part of a tsunami. But second of all, it doesn't really paint a positive image of the fact that we have an opportunity to work with 65-year-olds and older. But also something that we also, we work with GSA's National Center for Reframing Aging on training state departments of health and local departments of health on ageism. We have an ageism training every year. We teach them language. We teach them how they should work with their communications department on talking about older adults. But even beyond that, just making sure that We also consider that older adults are not a monolith, and that when we say 65 plus, we really mean a lot of variations within 65 plus. So it's really, so we try to focus on even breaking it down further, encourage people to think about how they're communicating about older adults to eliminate that bias and eliminate the perceptions about older adults, and to, again, encourage people to use better language to be supportive of not only their work, but older adults as well.
Thank you. That, it's so interesting how that just seems to cross our work, no matter what the domain is that we're in. The language that we use and the way that we work with people is at the center of all of it. And I am seeing some additional questions that have come in from the chat. You've intrigued people here with some of your comments, and thinking about the decision-making process. Is policy a good fit for me or not? Would I, when I'm trying to navigate between an academic, what are some of the things that we might think about considering in that decision? And then once you've done it, can you go back? Is it possible to return to an academic career? So some thoughts on either of those?
I don't mind. Oh, go ahead, Karon. Go ahead.
I'm going to start because I admittedly am a little bit of a hybrid. I never intended to be a hybrid. I've been teaching as an adjunct for 10 years. I don't know how that happens, honestly. Well, no, it's because I was able to take my passion for health equity and reducing health disparities and take it to the classroom. And so I get to talk about what I'm passionate about. I get to also talk about policy in an aging and policy course, and help and equip and tool the next upcoming gerontologists. So I would say now I don't think it would be challenging to re-enter. If you left academia and went into the industry and got skills and went back. I've actually been approached, I'd say a few times, especially more now. And by now, I'm meaning given we had a whole pandemic. And as I like to say, excuse me if I'm a little too colloquial, but gerontologists became the it people. People now are interested in not only the teaching experience, but also your applied experience. So I would say you just have to make sure, again, how do you brand yourself and how do you position yourself to appeal to different industries. I'll also say, and it's kind of a challenge to some of the questions. I didn't necessarily, I was looking for jobs. So I didn't necessarily always look just for a policy job. And I also would challenge you to think, and this is kind of my pluralism, outside the box, because policy is not just laws. It's not just working on Capitol Hill, which I thought I was supposed to go work on Capitol Hill. I did not last very long there because that's just not my space. But there is policy opportunities in a lot of places. So it's not just looking at strictly just policy organizations. Like AARP, for example, has a policy division, but there's policy happening in other aspects of AARP. There's policy happening in a variety of organizations. And I also would encourage you to not look at just aging organizations that there's like a list of like 10 or 15. My organization is not an organization that's prominently aging. And you can find opportunities, and opportunities are being created all the time for gerontologists with unique backgrounds to come in and be, as I call it, I don't believe in the big fish, little pond, but I believe in the shiny fish in whatever pond you're in. You're like the only shiny whatever fish that you think is unique in that pond. So I like being the content expert at the table. So Chris made a comment about you don't necessarily need a PhD. This is true. However, it does help establish you as the content expert in the room. So people will say, well, we have an expert in gerontology. So that's my 2 cents on that part.
Professor Sarah, did you have something you'd like to add to that?
I was going to say, so I've done this also for the American Sociological Association on their non-academic career panels. And I think it is a big myth that you can't go back. In fact, I don't think it's like there's this perception of this discrete, like this firewall between academia and the outside world, the ivory tower and the outside world. And in my experience, I have not seen that firewall really be a barrier. I've seen folks come in and out and go back. And I mean, Colleen McBride, who was my boss at NHGRI at NIH, went to become she was the branch chief of a research program at NIH and ended up becoming, head of public health or at Emory. So I think it's a myth. I think it's a myth perpetuated by the fact that our advisors have never done anything else. And so they don't know that it's possible to come back. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for reminding us in academics that we don't always have these experiences outside of academics when we're guiding students. You are so right about that. Another good reason to be having this conversation today. Anything you'd like to add, Sarah?
No, I mean, I really agree with everything. Similar to what others have said, I've been approached for academic positions. So I think it's just a matter of, where you want to be. And so we see quite a bit of, I see, at least in my cohorts, people going back and forth, depending on what you want and what your priorities are for your life and your family and everything. So these are all individualized decisions, but I think there's a lot of flexibility, as others have spoken to, because of the importance of aging and the value that gerontologists bring.
Great, thank you.
And you've all kind of touched on this at a high level and talking about your journeys and some of the challenges that you face. The intersection of public health and aging, open data systems, and promoting and advocating for gerontology in data spaces and in STEM spaces, and the intersection between aging and disability. In your view, what do you think are some of the most pressing issues or gaps that need to be addressed in gerontology from a non-academic perspective?
I can start. One thing that I think that is important and where we see a firm role, and I speak for myself and my colleague Megan Wolf, is the role of translating data. Academic partners are key, and a lot of times when we're working with different departments of health, we encourage them to seek out academic partners because they are keenly able to help and support in the areas of helping to translate that data into science, and then they can help build a better opportunities moving forward. So for example, the Mississippi Department of Health partnered with UMass to develop data profiles on all the counties in Mississippi. Those data profiles tell the health and all these different conditions. They use CMS data. So for people that love crunching numbers, this is the perfect opportunity. And then being able to take that and in partnership with a locale, with a state or an organization that works directly with older adults, and use it to approach funders, approach policymakers, approach new other partners. So it's a very much so needed tool to be able to translate. So not even if you can analyze it, but also be able to translate it and make it into a narrative that can be used beyond the walls of publications. Publications are critical, but next step, take it and again, these organizations are looking for partners because they are either not skilled in or they don't have the capacity at this point to always focus in on data. So data, even when I worked in housing, that was a big thing. Like that was not research was not a area, but they needed funding. And what do funders want to see? The data. And if you don't have the data and you don't have the systems to do all this, it's like it just needs to be a better synergy there. So that is one opportunity, but again, also being able to translate it. So I think Chris made a comment earlier about speaking, and I think this will address a comment in the chat about what skill do you think is very, very important. Being able to talk. I know that sounds very simple, but being able to describe and discuss things succinctly, that's one big thing. I know when we talk about our research, we get excited, but succinctly and in many audiences, and get people aware and excited about the information. So that translational piece, I think, is important, and partnering. I think that is an opportunity for academics to really help, as I say, sit at both tables. So if you come from academia and you enter into an organization where you have an opportunity to help make awareness of different opportunities, you can help translate some of that information. I've actually sat at the table where I was a facilitator between an organization and a university to help bring together a new type of opportunity. So that's my piece.
I definitely agree with that translation and making sure the information gets into the hands of people. That's a big part of what I do. I'm going to touch on a different topic, which is the diversity of participants in research. So that is, for me, the most pressing issue. And being on the funder side, you see a lot of people that, they say they're going to sample or do research from that community. They're going to go to that community without the real details on how they're going to interact and engage with that community. So one example I hear a lot is, okay, well, we're going to go to clinics that have a lot of Medicaid participants, so we're going to get low income. But just because you go to a clinic that has a lot of people that are on Medicaid does not mean they will participate in the research. It does not mean that people that are racial or ethnically diverse will participate in research. So that, for me, is really pressing. One thing I did when I was in government is I wrote a rule that changed the review criteria for research so that reviewers the applications had to specifically address, and this is again for disability, but how people with disabilities were included as part of the core research team. So the core, PI team as senior research staff. And so I think just to give an example of how you can influence policy on the funder side, you can think about review criteria and how to shape it in a way that they have to essentially put more thought behind how they're going to reach certain populations, including having people with lived experiences as part of core research teams.
Thank you all for that. Yes, there are so many, from each of our perspectives, we can probably come up with a list of things that are really pressing issues. So there's not a lack of work for all of us to be doing. And it's kind of exciting. It makes me excited about thinking about careers in this area and space. And I wanted to bring us back, if we could, to some of the last questions that came up in the chat. These are really related more to what it's like to work outside of the academic environment. And these are things like career mobility, even benefits, the quality of life. I think we've all taught our mentees in the academic world that it's a slog in the tenure track faculty line. And I think there's just questions about what kind of life might I expect in the world of a non-academic career, in especially a policy related one. And I don't know if any of you would like to just quickly respond to, do you see differences in that? Or is that not part of your thinking about choosing this as a career path?
So can I just clarify? So you're asking sort of, is the work-life balance different? Is that kind of where yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think it's really what you make of it. I think at least in government positions, there's real strong emphasis on work-life balance, but it really depends on like where you are in your career and what agency you're working on. So there's a lot of nuance involved in that. I do think that there's less I would say stress to conform to always being on, and that there's more of a 9 to 5 kind of flavor to some of the career options. But that's not the case for everything. And so like the political position I was in was 100 hours a week. You're always on, you're never off. And so no work-life balance at all. But then, good practices at most agencies sort of really, federal agencies really want you to have an outside life and don't want you to take your work home and want you to not have to be on all the time. I think it's different in the post-COVID era with more telework, with more remote work, more hybrid work. And I think that's more consistent with the academic world than it probably previously was. But yeah, so I think it really is what you make of it. And there are a lot of perks to being in the academic world. Like there's pre-COVID perks like travel and things like that, but that we may not have as much opportunity to do. But on the flip side, I think there's a real difference in culture with respect to valuing that work-life balance. That's not just lip service. At least that's what I found.
I would add having worked in a variety of settings, for-profit, government, now, and it really varies. There's no like, if you work for the government, it's going to be like this. If you work for a nonprofit, it's going to be like this. If you work, it is going to vary. It's going to, I agree with Chris, it's going to vary by a little bit by your level. And some of it comes from kind of earned trust. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But some of it also comes from who you end up reporting to. I'm spoiled. I'm very, very spoiled right now. I work for an organization that completely has been looking at me sideways because I haven't taken a vacation this summer. They're like, what are you doing? And you need some time off. I'm like, I'm fine. My weekends are, they're like, no, you need some time off. Not because I'm stressed or anything. It's just, it's a downtime for us. So they encourage a lot of wellness. They encourage us to focus on that. So it varies. Again, when I worked at the NIH, this is pre-pandemic, there was a big focus on getting to work 2 days out of the office, like telework for 2 days. That was a big deal. Now, most organizations are at 1 or 2 days in the office. So I think it's just going to vary. I've worked in places where I didn't feel that I meshed well with the structure. And then I've worked places where I was like, oh, I could stay here for a while, but it depends. And you'll have to kind of figure out what works best for you. I know some people have families and being able to take care of kids. So you want to be, when you're looking for jobs, not even just strictly policy, any job, you want to also be slightly interviewing the organization as well. Finding out about them, because you want to find out about who you're going to be reporting to, and if you can have a synergy with us. My boss met my parents back in March, so we have a very, very strong relationship, but it can vary. And I saw the question about benefits. So my benefits are great. I won't go down into nitty gritty, but I don't have any complaints about my benefits, my 401, all that. I mean, I have no complaints there. And salary wise, again, I think to Patty's and others' point, that could be a separate conversation, but that's going to depend on your experience and your level. But I mean, again, you can't say that all nonprofit jobs don't pay well, because that's not true. You can't say that you'll end up at a government job that pays you well, because then you don't know. It's just, again, there's a lot of variables that we can't give you. I personally can't give you hard and fast rules about this. But part of that is the process of navigating the landscape. And I will say, if you have anybody, or if you've met people that you want to mentor you through that process, I would talk to them help them latch onto them and help them navigate, I can't talk today, get them to help you navigate that process, because again, there's things like salary negotiation. So that is, yeah. And I have a great work-life balance. I have a very, very, very firm policy of not opening my computer after Friday at like 5 or 6 o'clock. And I don't open it until Monday morning. That's me. I don't take it into my bedroom. I stopped that after I got out of grad school, but that is me. I set those boundaries up, and I'm still able to maintain. So it does vary from locale to locale though.
Sarah, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Not too much. I mean, I really agree with everything that's been said. It really depends. I take the interviewing organizations really seriously, and having one-on-one calls with people and seeing how things are going. I've been really fortunate to be in organizations where there was a supportive community, which is, I think, just so important. And that can be in any organization, academia or non-academic. But because I think the expectations for non-academia can sometimes be unknown, doing that extra work is important. But I do want to mention what Chris mentioned, which is we hire too. And so people that are interested in, talking to me after this, I'd be more than happy to speak. So.
I'm sorry, Tifa's not hiring. Internships, we're not. I wish we could. We are a small team, but I will offer, if you have questions about trying to navigate LinkedIn and turning that CV into a resume, I'm helpful there, but no, we're not hiring. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. I can't believe we're already through an hour. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sarah Dice, to bring us home.
Yeah, so I mean, thank you all for sharing your insights and career trajectories. Just as we bring this conversation to a close today, we've asked our panelists to share just a pearl of wisdom. So let's start with Dr. Sarah Ruiz. What do you have for us today?
Sure. So I think for folks that are interested in being on the funder side and doing policy work on the funder side, I really encourage, and I know people do this as part of academia, but reading funding opportunities, and not just the usual suspects, so the NIH funding opportunities, but looking at organizations like before, looking at foundations, looking at what the flavor that people are, because if you're interested in being in this space, there's so much that goes into those funding opportunities that you can help understand what the priorities are for that organization.
Karon?
I would add, think outside the box. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but and I say that don't restrict yourself to looking. I remember talking to a young man. He was like, I want to go work at AARP. And I said, well, why? He said, because that's an age organization, they have policy. And I said, there are other organizations that are doing policy related to older adults. You just, don't put yourself in those bounds. So think outside the box, and network. You never know where your colleagues that you have now are going to end up. You never know who you're not talking to at a conference. So network, and again, don't network with the intent of maybe they give you a job one day. Just meet people, because you never know who has your resume. Actually, I learned about this job because of one of my good friends. She said, oh, here's a job, and I'm like, okay. And that is the key thing, is networking. I can't stress that enough, because a lot of opportunities are not always gotten or received just through a traditional interview format. There are a lot of things that happen behind the email, like, hey, we're posting this, apply for it now. That happens a lot. So just be mindful about keeping your network open, and don't lock yourself into a certain set of organizations that you're just not trolling, but scrolling through their website regularly. Expand your search, ask people, where opportunities are.
And lastly, Chris.
Well, first, I think Karon had said it the best about networking, definitely. But I think the thing I can add is, have breadth. in your searches, and don't limit yourself to sort of a narrow field. Be strategic in your marketing. Like they might not be advertising for a gerontologist position. They might be advertising for a statistician or for policy analyst or health analyst or administrator, and you have that expertise. You just have to brand it correctly and market it correctly. And then the other bit of wisdom I have is go to the scientific meeting and go to the vendors. Because the vendors who are sponsoring the meeting, they often have non-academic jobs waiting for you. They're delighted to talk to you. A lot of federal agencies, a lot of publishers, a lot of organizations like PCORI and others set up shop there. RAND, for example. So go there and talk and network with those folks. That's all.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your pearl of wisdom and several strategies. I'm sure as a group we learned several tips in the non-academic careers world. So as we close our career conversation today, we encourage our audience to review other GSA-sponsored career conversations and related and resources related to non-career and aging. And Patty will share some resources in the chat box. And she already did, I believe. All right, Sarah, to you.
So everyone will also include links to these resources in a follow-up email. If you could just join me in thanking Drs. Ruiz, Marcum, and Phillips for taking time out of their day today to have a conversation with us, as well as the members of the work group who planned this conversation, and especially a big thank you to Gina Schoen from GSA for all of the behind-the-scenes coordination that made this conversation possible.
And lastly, we will be sending out a brief survey asking you for additional topics and your reactions to our presentations today. Please look for that in a follow-up email along with the resource list, and the recording will be available on the GSA website. And thanks everyone, this was wonderful.